Welcome to the show, everybody. For our guest today, we have James Patrick. He's the filmmaker behind Planet Lockdown, and he's bringing forward a new documentary entitled CBDC, The End of Money, which examines central bank digital currencies, and it questions whether they are a step towards digital control or financial evolution. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I had a chance to watch some of your documentary last night, and it was really good. I've been a geek about finance and banking and all these things and how they work because I think it's pretty important as a society, certainly as citizens, where there's an ever encroaching and looming massive monolith of government on our backs, that we really understand the things we're interacting with, and arguably the most intimate of those might be money. And
hmm
yet, most people have no idea what money even is, where it comes from, how it works, how it's
Yeah.
being used. So I was really interested with some of the stuff you had in the documentary. And can you give us just a little overview of what the documentary is about?
Yeah. It's about, I guess, central bank digital currencies, what they are, and um, basically the Bank of International Settlements has been pushing them. It's an initiative coming out of the central banks, which is sort of they're kind of run by these class of like international. You can technically call them international bankers, but those are the main kind of class of people pushing these sort of extreme control agendas through a combination of media, government, NGOs, corporate world, medical, military. It's sort of like they got their tentacles everywhere. And these very older families, been around a long time and have more that level of sophistication of initiatives. And then really the film goes into the origins of Bitcoin, what's the relationship between what was the purpose behind the creation of that, and how cryptocurrencies, stable coins play into things. And then finally, like the token is this initiative to basically put all people, assets, objects on universal ledger, on a kind of one world ledger, the tokenization of all assets. They call them like real world assets, um, RWAs or whatever is like a term I've heard introduced the last year or two. But they're and then like Fink was talking about, there was another really weird initiative called the Natural Asset Companies initiative, the intrinsic exchange group. The Rockefellers came out with this in the summer of 2020 after there was so much success with screwing us with COVID. They had another scheme they wanted to let loose, which is like basically to privatize the environment and these intangible like the hydrologic cycle over North America could be declared an asset and parked in a tradable company. Like how would they even claim to own this thing, but
Right.
I asked one banker, I was like, what are they doing with this is so weird, and he's like, oh, James, it's about the collateral. Then they can declare it an asset and then use it as collateral many times over
Right.
in the financial system. So yeah, there's a lot in
Yeah.
there.
Oh, it's so much. I mean, there's so much to get into. It's
Oh, I forgot digital IDs. Yeah, digital IDs, the whole thing. Yeah.
yeah, digital IDs. One of the things that people who aren't into these subjects might not know, but there's this really big push to create the digital IDs, and I think that's a good place to start because
Sure.
the propaganda around it, or the media spin around these things, is that it's a fundamental human right for everybody to have an ID, and people are debanked or unbanked, and therefore, as a gracious step forward in our beneficence as the international banking class, we're going to make it possible for everybody to have a bank account, which at
Yeah.
one level kind of sounds like, okay, well, we need bank accounts. I need to pay for things. So what's the problem with that? But I don't think it's as benevolent as we might think. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in a phrase, Gates sort of summed it up on his blog. He says he was writing about the in 2016. There was a huge push in India called the Aadhaar program, and a local oligarch there ran it, and they created a new department in Indian bureaucracy and started pushing this like digital ID system where they would biometrically like scan everybody in India, and like imagine this big messy country of India, like billion Indians, and you want to like fingerprint, iris scan all of them, and then put them in some big database and give them a ID code. So anyway, this guy. So anyway, Gates on his blog wrote an article about it. He said, "Oh, making the invisible visible." Like, so just unpack that for a second. Like,
Right.
who are they? Who are they invisible to? And now who are they visible to? I mean, it's like this kind of panopticon police state, some government system. Like, what do Indian peasants need to be taxed more for their own benefit? I mean, like, what's the problem with if they trade with cash and they have a living and they make a decent, I mean, they make some money for themselves. Now if you start tagging them, you put them, now they can pay with bank accounts. You link them with bank accounts. It's only going to lead to them getting screwed by the state a bit more. I mean, or taxed or so. I don't. Maybe there's some efficiencies in there. You could argue that they could get to have bank accounts get automated things, but I struggle to see how that's some fundamental benefit to people or they spin it as this human rights thing. They're like, oh, these poor unbanked Africans. I mean, like, do they really need your banking services, or is it just kind of trying to rope them into some new cattle system of tax system and stuff? I don't see the Europeans doing really well with all the taxes they pay, and so
Right.
yeah, these government tax schemes are not benefiting humanity.
Yeah, one of the things I was shocked to discover when I started learning a little bit more about money was that, we have to pay money to use money. And especially in the United States, that's what the Federal Reserve is. That's what interest rates are. Like almost all money comes into existence through some amount of debt. And so there's a price tag associated with that, which
Yeah.
interestingly means, and I forget who told me this, but I wish I'd remember their name, but they said that means that your local prisoners probably have access to cheaper money than you do because they can at least exchange goods and services with cigarettes where you have to use Federal Reserve notes. And so it's like they're taking that concept of becoming the middleman for everything, because that's what money is. It's a middleman. And they're trying to make people who aren't necessarily having to be the middleman in this situation. They want to bank people like in India or in, anywhere they can, basically, so that then they can have access to that. And I think that's where the tracking comes in. So how do CBDCs and, the tracking come into that equation?
With the digital IDs, you mean? Or
Yeah, digital IDs and
yeah,
just currency in general.
yeah. I mean, CBDCs are basically a program trackable money, and then you have to kind of link it with a digital ID to identify the person and link it with their wallet to make sure that it's them spending the money. So, digital IDs and CBDCs are prerequisites for the other to work. You need to have both operational. You need to have a digital ID operational to introduce the CBDC. So that's kind of why in 2016 you had India do the first digital ID in a very kind of challenging country to do that in. Then in 2020 they piloted a CBDC program in Nigeria, which is like I think 300 million people, almost 300 million people, and just like well over 70% cash there. And the government. So I think the logic was, okay, if we can get these to work in these countries, then we could get it to work anywhere. The CBDC project in Nigeria was a big failure, but they kind of tried to bum rush it. They were like, okay, we're recalling all the notes, and we just came out of the CBDC program. They had this really ganky app called the Naira, and then they sort of recalled all the cash and invalidated all the cash. So I met some Nigerians who were there during the time, and they said, everyone lost all their savings, and then they just sort of introduced, and then no one wanted to take the CBDC because the last thing in the world they would trust is Nigerian politicians. So no one adopted it. I mean, they sooner starve than do that. So there was kind of riots and shootings. There was riots outside the central bank and other bank offices because there's no cash, and then people had a lot of problems for some months. I mean, that kind of program you'd want to do over a couple of years, not like 2 months. So it really didn't work. There was protests. They had to reintroduce cash, and the adoption rates went from like 0 to like 5% for the
Wow.
CBDC. So
Yeah, that was a pretty entertaining and a kind of hopeful example from the film, was just how spectacularly the Nigerian CBDC failed.
Yeah.
So, and it just goes to show you people are a little bit more resistant, even in places in the West where we might think that they might not be as amazingly advanced as we are. But, you know, so basically with the CBDC,
Central bank digital currency. Yeah.
yeah, you can have like almost total surveillance of a person's financial activities, and then also do the whole social credit score thing. Is that right?
Yeah. So every transaction is, I mean, is on a ledger. They can see everything. I mean, it's not too much different than today with the bank digital currency, except the potential for sort of like programmable integration is there. Now we could achieve something similar with conventional systems. I mean, with bank digital currencies, but the the, the wet dream for CBDCs for these sort of nefarious oligarchs is that you could really program everything. Now, to give you an example, I think Thailand just did a CBDC pilot, and they said, okay, well, you'll get $250 if you sign on to the program, but you have to get a digital ID to get it, and then you get a debit of 250 into your account. So they're enrolling people into the tax system already like that. But they said the money won't work. This is sort of emblematic of where this is going, and we already went with this program. Was that they said it will not work 4 kilometers away from your home, where your registered address is, and you can only buy certain things with it. You can only buy groceries and like maybe some stuff at the hardware store, and that's it.
Wow.
So no other services could you buy with it. So that's sort of the logic of this thing. I mean, when I did Planet Lockdown, I was traveling around. I started hearing like in Germany and I was there in fall 2020. There was like in Ireland and Australia, they started saying that, oh, if the cases hit certain levels, you're not allowed to go 5, 10, 15 kilometers from your home. And there's no way of enforcing that at that time. Like, your bank and your bank card and your cash would still work. But with these sort of CBDC systems, this edicts like that could be enforced. Now we see this big push in 15-minute cities, kind of glorifying this local living, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this massive idiotic trend of bike lanes and like punishing people that have cars. That's this sort of urban effect of trying to get people into their local area, and they're spinning it as some new. I know there's just relentless media pushing, just glorifying it, saying it's for the environment and all this stuff, but it's like there's a confluence of these policies towards this kind of vision, and CBDCs give it the muscle or the technical implementational ability to be implemented. So it's concerning, and I think people need to be aware of where this is going, and that really these are the only. There's no benefit to these things. Like I'd say I call it the end of money because I'm doing a book on money and economics and kids cartoons now. But like
Nice.
the 4 basic definitions of money are like divisibility, transportability, store value, and readily exchangeable. So if you're programming money and telling you what you can and can't buy with it, or another thing they've said is we want the money. Oh, this is another thing in the Thai program. They said it'll go bad after 6 months. The money will not be spendable after 6 months' time. So if your money loses its value after 6 months, and you can tell them who they can trade it with or what they can buy with it, they've just kind of eliminated 2 of the core definitions of money: the store value and readily exchangeable. So it's sort of like it's no longer money, these things. So I think with an implementation of CBDCs, and we'll see robust black market emerge. And I think there'll be pushes to create local monies. Cities, counties, states, even private companies can start to issue their own monies. Some of this crypto stuff might get more traction. So I'm not a doomsday sayer that we're all going to starve and die and da-da-da-da. I think it will be a chaotic period we're going to live through.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different things to get into. I mean, one point you made, and then maybe we can tie this into another thing you said, is that, we kind of already live in a world that's heavily digital anyway. Like most money is in your bank account, and, You got to use your credit cards, and so there's a lot of, it's not like you're exchanging paper bills anymore like maybe you used to back in the, I don't know, 70s or 80s. Maybe that was the last
Yeah.
time that really became a thing. So we're kind of already there in a sense, but at the same time this is just almost like a different layer of integration where you can not only have total surveillance, which is something, the people that want to do this definitely want to have total surveillance, but they also want to be able to, push behaviors as I forget his name, but the head of BlackRock was talking about. And so just having the idea that you have money that you worked for. I mean, you exchanged your labor. When it comes to, currencies, in a sense, labor is like the oldest currency on earth. And yet, if you exchange your labor by working, the thing that you get in return might expire. Like, it's like a loaf of bread or something. So it just kind of creates a very dystopian picture. But then at the same time, you have, like you said, this black market. And, one question I've had, and I've heard people talk about this, I wanted to ask you about this. So we have CBDCs, we have, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin probably being the most famous. You know, I got to believe that there'll be some type of balance where people want to, not completely buy in. Even if you're the most like loyal citizen to the bankers on earth, you're probably not going to want to just go all in with CBDCs. So do you think the bankers just like, whoops, so that slipped our mind on this one, we'll have to deal with that later? Do you think they have like some kind of way of dealing with the inevitable resistance towards full integration with CBDCs?
The what? Sorry, you're asking if they have a maybe
Like
way
a,
dealing with the black market?
yeah, just anything you've heard or seen in your research or studies about, how they're going to deal with the things they encountered in Nigeria. Like people didn't want to do it. So, what are they going to do as a way to deal with the resistance? Have you heard of anything?
No, I mean it's just kind of they're like a one-trick pony. So it's just like just more government, more control. It's the classic stuff, It's like they're
Right.
just going to cook up ways to try to like corral people into things. But that's sort of the way people wake up to these things is that they just continually see that the same malicious attitude of viewing people like cows that you're just beating in a pen. I mean, I don't, people, I think at some point, wittingly, unwittingly, or happy about it or not, they realize that they're getting abused or mistreated, and they try to like just brainwash people into like wanting their own mistreatment, So yeah, I don't know. It is surprising how dumb people can be to fall for all these things. But I think if you're raised in a society, I'm in like Sweden now, and people are quite consensus complicit with everything here. They're very kind of not kind of gullible, for lack of a kinder way to put it. But I think it's, but I mean, Americans, a lot of them are quite not just quite government skeptic. So I do have more hope for Americans for some of these things. But it does look like there's a strong strategy of divide and conquer being pushed to a lot of these things are a lot of these sort of divisive narratives and distraction narratives are a lot stronger in the U.S. information sphere. Whether it's the right, the left, the black, the white, the Trump, the non-Trump, this, that, da, 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 da. It's just like on and on and on. And these things are never like this January 6th story just keeps going on forever. And it's really not much of a story. I was there. I saw the thing. It was like this non-event. And then they're still like now, like what, 5 years later, still talking about, I mean,
Right.
Some nothing story. And it's like, I don't really want to dignify even mentioning it because it's just, but it's like, that's what the media does. They always keep us fighting about things like that aren't important, and I think our freedom, our money, our property rights, our self-ownership, this is what's important. So
how do cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin maybe in general, factor? And I know you said you talk about the origin. How does that play into what the documentary gets into?
I sort of, from what I've found out, it sort of seems like the central bankers probably did create Bitcoin through the intelligence agencies, and sort of because it did. I mean, I fell for it for years, and I was an early advocate of it. but I do think it's sort of, we know that these guys' plans was to create a cashless society and a more surveillable society, a controllable cashless society where the transactions could be controlled. I think that was sort of a known objective, at least back into the 90s. And like in 1996, NSA, I guess they got NSA to write a technical paper on how to do that. There was some other Israeli paper in that same period, and then there were several sort of like, there's Liberty Gold and eGold, which were sort of kind of private companies trying to do money outside the state. Came down really hard on them, threw these guys in jail right away. But then Bitcoin came along, and it's like, we're still supposed to believe this stupid story of Satoshi Nakamoto. Like, they can't figure out who did this. I mean, as far as I understand, like 3 interns at NSA could find out who that was in the weekend, you know? Right. So like, we're supposed to believe there's some big anti-state system that NSA just doesn't know who did this. And like, they're not bothering this guy or this set of people. I mean, as far as I understand, there was only about a dozen people programmers that worked in that sector. In that specific line of programming, and you know, some of them have anarchist sort of cypherpunk leanings, but a lot of them were employed by the state nonetheless to work on these cryptography type programs. So as far as I understand, it was probably maybe 3 or more people out of a list of a dozen that we can all know who these names are. So it's not like some hyper secret thing. And then yet we're still told it's some mysterious guy. And then it was using SHA-256, this kind of NSA released algorithm that all the embassies use for communications. So there are some clues that it was Western intelligence. I think the Russian intelligence agency, GRU, officially says NSA made it. That's their official position.
Really? Okay. Can you go into what SHA-256? What was that again, you said?
SHA-256 is just like an encryption algorithm for communications now. Like usually and the U.S. embassies use that. It's used by a lot of companies, but it was originally used or issued by NSA publicly as an algorithm. Now in the past, for past projects, we do know that algorithms they've released like that have had backdoors. So that doesn't mean they could. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin has a backdoor per se, but it means that if they revealed the backdoor to SHA-256, Bitcoin would be at least temporarily shut down. So until they reprogrammed another algorithm into it, the encryption algorithm. So like the basic encryption backbone, this isn't 100% saying it is the NSA that did it, but it's a little clue to it. There's just. I guess another problem I have with Bitcoin is like that it fulfills these sort of surveillance objectives in that all the transactions are on a public ledger. Now, it's not totally anonymous. We call pseudonymous. So you can see all the transactions, but you don't know who they are. So you could take all these steps to hide your identity. But to be realistic, if you're going to have significant holdings in Bitcoin and you want to buy a house, you want to buy a Ferrari, you want to buy all these assets, you want to buy your island or whatever you're trying to do, anything over $10,000, and they're on your ass looking for it, they can figure it out. You got to go through these exchanges. So it's not like, okay, great, you have control of your wallets, you can send your money around, and they can never seize the accounts. They can seize you. They can track you when you bring it in and out. So from an investigator's point of view, it's not like this get out of jail free card. Like, you still have the problem of the government. Just because you own Bitcoin doesn't mean the government's not going to bother you. So it's like we still need to like resolve the societal illness of this like this authoritarian states bothering us. It's just owning Bitcoin, or like, I kind of disagree with this ultra parallel society sort of thing you hear people say all the time. It's like just opting out. That's what Timothy Leary said in the 60s. He's like, tune in, turn on, drop out. Like, if you drop out of the system and don't fix it, I don't know how. Like, it's great you build an alternative. That's great. We need to do that. But I mean, if like the mainstream society is sick and armed and out to kill you, I don't see just making a parallel peaceful one that can just still destroy it. So it's like, it doesn't. Although I think I agree with a lot of it. I think it's we do need to fix the society's problems and not just opt out. If everyone just opted out, we wouldn't have. No one would be opting into anything. You know, just you know what I'm saying. So it's like this. I wonder how much of it is people being a little lazy, or it's like Timothy Leary, who was a psyop to sort of get smart people off the playing field, like Sun Tzu, just
Right.
get your enemy off the playing field without a shot fired.
I
Um,
mean, I think even a cursory examination of history, especially the history of the media, would tell you that there's some very reliable interests that always seem to kind of be there when they need to be to push a certain narrative, and they kind of use like a Plato's cave like system where society is a very curated place with certain kind of simplistic narratives, and you can very easily be pushed from one place to another through that narrative without you even knowing it, because the bottom line is we all have to work. I mean, some of us, are independently wealthy and we can spend our time doing things. If you're an international banker, you can spend a lot of your time conniving, but most of the population has to work and spend their time doing things. So, and I'm hardly an expert in this, but in me just looking at, the history of psyops and subversive influencing from the intelligence apparatus, this has their fingerprints all over it. I mean, they can create a counterculture. If you look at the way that the free
yeah.
banking era in the United States took place before the enactment of the Fed in 1913, there was like a 90-year run-up of this free banking era, and anybody with a stamp and a printing press could print up currency. And they kind of like, it seems like they at least took advantage of that activity to sell everybody on the idea of a centralized banking system when the Fed era came around. And in my opinion, it mirrors that very much with the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies. You've got like the FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. You've got all these people that are trying to obviously capitalize on everybody wanting to get in and win the crypto lottery. And that kind of
Hmm.
helps your narrative for pushing people to a safe and reliable digital currency that people can use. So I think, you're definitely thinking about it the way I would think about it. So
Yeah.
yeah. So as far as like, you mentioned, or it has been suggested that, we're in this, whether we like it or not, that central bank digital currencies are coming, whether we like it or not. Is there any kind of positive? Is it all doom and gloom? Is there like something that can be done to help us in this situation?
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. How do you stop? How do you stop this? I don't know. I see this stuff coming pretty quickly, and not. I don't know. I mean, oh, well, actually, I'll take that back. There is a really good round of initiatives going on now on the state level to make these gold depositories. So I think at least 5 states in the U.S. are have bills introduced now to create transactional gold, sort of have state sponsored gold warehouses that then you could get accounts on a card and trade in fractions of gold. So that's actually quite. I would encourage everyone to call your state legislator and advocate for those bills. If enough people do that, they will pass these things. I'm working on this other film now on the Great Taking issue, and so I've been hearing about these bills for like being introduced by the same legislators. Um, so I do think that if the feds get really crazy and you have central banks running all these things, like the states are going to be our hope for more sound laws and stuff. So for the Americans, I would encourage them to support bills to amend the UCC to restore property rights to securities, which is this great taking thing, and that's a revision of Article 8, 1994 revision of Article 8 to strike certain lines from that, but also these transactional gold bills to create these depositories, because if that should happen now anyway, so it's legal tender under the Constitution, and it's not there's no way the feds can get in the way of that. I mean, maybe there is, but there's not. It's legal under the Constitution, and I know that would definitely fill in some of the void if CBDCs, or if there's also the threat that sort of a CBDC like control system can emerge from the conventional banking and system with it's like dollar denominated stable coins that basically like all of our bank accounts would sort of quietly in the background convert to like
Hmm.
bank issued tokenized deposits, stable coins like Wells Fargo coin, Bank of America dollar derivative token coin, and that these, and then they would start to program those according to ESG ratings, climate ratings, um, maybe anti-Semitism ratings, or whatever kind of stupid thing they come up with, like, like, oh, your risk factor of this individual is higher because you posted this on the internet, or what I mean,
Right.
or like, or you've been eating too much of this, and this is. So one thing we saw in COVID was like they were censoring people. The private companies were censoring people, and that was legal, but the government's not allowed to censor you. It's the same thing goes with CBDCs. Is that there are constitutional restrictions in the United States system against the government issuing CBDCs and controlling you. Like they're not allowed to do that.
Right.
So the way they can get around it is by having the banks do it. So the banks can say they already do that with the surveillance. So the AML, the Anti-Money Laundering, Know Your Customer, Bank Secrecy Act sort of regulations require the banks to monitor all of our transactions and then report suspicious activity to the government. So it's like they're sort of doing, they're sort of getting around financial privacy. They already did that since the 60s. JFK passed this Bank Secrecy Act, and they started to do financial surveillance on people kind of beyond what the government was allowed to do. And so that's already just a fixture of the financial system. So those sort of systems can ratchet up more, and
Hmm.
then the private companies can come down on us, and we arrive at the same thing like a CBDC. So these transactional gold things, I think, are a solution. So I've been given a lot of hope, working on the Great Taking film, that state legislatures are going to be a recourse to a lot of these problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing I want to ask you about before we wind down is I've been researching this kind of stuff for years now, and one thing that always dawned on me as a possible solution is, at the end of the day, they can build the most sophisticated systems in the world, but like we saw in Nigeria, it ultimately is up to the people to use them, and they can't, like, at least we're not at the point yet where they can stop people from meeting behind a Walmart somewhere and trying to sell each other milk or something like that, even even if they have to use bottle caps to do it. So I don't think that that's something to be discounted. I know in this like very technologically driven world, we think of those things and be like, oh, well, that's so primitive, and we shouldn't do that. But that's a huge power. And as the
Mhm.
Nigerians pointed, kind of showed everybody when they tried to roll these things out, like even a bunch of concerned people who don't want to necessarily do what the big bad international bankers want to do won't do it. So, I think at the very least, raising awareness about like you're doing with your film, and it sounds like you're doing with some of the other projects about what money is, how we can use it is huge because we actually
Yeah.
have way more power than we think. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this digitized society is like really sick and mentally ill. People are markedly more mentally ill today than they were when I was in high school, and or when in the 90s, or like I don't think society's advanced much. I wouldn't go as far as Ted Kaczynski in his thing, but I mean, like, there's definitely, I don't know that we're so better off now with all these phones and all this crap. And like,
Right.
so I mean, I was in Hurricane Helene like 3 months ago,
Oh,
and the phones were knocked out for like easily a week and a half, and the first 3 days I was like, this is kind of nice that there's no phone. And like people were walking outside their house talking to each other for the first time, and it
right.
was like it was like pretty nice. I mean, I kind of enjoyed that part of it, but but yeah, another thing that was crazy was that you could only use cash, and everywhere was closed, but anywhere that was open, it was only cash. You couldn't get gas only with cash if there was 1 in 20 open. The
Wow.
gas station. So that really taught me, if you have a natural disaster and you have CBDCs, like people be like shanking each other. Like, I mean, it was like the behavior of people got really wacky really quick. Like within two
Hmm.
days, they were freaking out. 5 hour long lines for gas station, and like, I mean, it was like weird. There was one Trader Joe's, and it was like they're always full all the time normally, but like they had a 5 hour long line like 4 days in when they opened up. They got a Starlink up there and like
Right.
generated in the place, and then there was like 5 hour long lines in the first half of the day. Second of the day was actually less full than normal. So like the behavior of people is like gets really irrational.
Hmm.
Um, in these crisis moments. I don't know. That's not really what we're talking about here, but I think people. I think if maybe maybe if they push these kind of tech solutions so hard, and we have to revert back to more primitive like arrangement, that's probably a little bit more natural, or we may be. I think there's a sort of sickness with all this digitization. We're not advancing as a civilization
Right.
in terms of our intellect and our creativity and our empathy for one another. I mean, it's like I see these things taking a big beating in my lifetime. So what? So I don't know if they push these technocratic things. If people moved back on farms and got to know each other more, I don't know if that would be some big calamity. Even
It's, yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm actually in Western North Carolina right now, like 3 miles
really?
south of Asheville, and there's definitely a kind of like shell shock from people,
Hmm.
but there at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of people that kind of rediscovered something that maybe we should have not lost touch with, which is the human side of things, and that's hardly like a perfect solution, but like I was talking about earlier, if you can go to jail and you can figure out how to trade with cigarettes or whatever it is you're doing, and these guys can do it, I'm sure as human beings we can figure out a solution to
Yeah.
dealing with these problems. So
So yeah, that sort of gave me hope. I mean, it was a crazy time. It rattled me a little bit, but I mean, not as much as people in Gaza dealing with their shit, or like, I
right.
mean, there's crazier things that could happen to you. But I thought that was a really good experience to go through that, and like, I think people are stronger. A lot of the softies and a lot of the queers and softies left and kind of left the area for a while.
Right.
But it was a little bit, but it was like kind of, it was a nice experience, and it showed me that I don't know, and through different tragedies. I had a girlfriend that died a couple years ago, and
Mm.
I think there's sometimes tragedies bring you things that you wouldn't have had otherwise, or sometimes you're not on the path, and misfortunes arrive to you to teach you things. So
Hmm.
I think all these people need to have their eyes open in life, and not just see things as being a victim, but live your life moment to moment, and really appreciate what's the spiritual effect of these things that we go through. So even if we get through a crazy CBDC dystopian thing, I think people need to have faith that it's not the end of the world. Crazy things have happened many millions of times over, and then you're going to get through this and learn something from it. So
Yeah, 100%. So where can people go to see the documentary CBDC's The End of Money?
yeah, it's cbdctheendofmoney.com. You can watch it for free there. So it's cbdctheendofmoney.com. And yeah, so that's where you can see it.
Excellent. All right. Well, James, I really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to your next work.
Okay. Thank you so much.